In 1967, the nations of the world signed a treaty about space. It said that no nation could claim sovereignty over the moon, Mars, or any other celestial body. It said no government could plant a flag and declare ownership. It said space belonged to all of humanity. And for 13 years, it seemed like that was the end of the conversation. Then in 1980, a man named Dennis Hope sat down and read that treaty very carefully. And he noticed something. The treaty said no nation could claim sovereignty. It said nothing about individuals. So Dennis Hope did something that nobody had ever done before. He mailed a letter to the United Nations, to the United States government, to the Soviet Union. The letter stated simply that Dennis Hope was claiming the moon as his personal property, along with Mars, Venus, and several other celestial bodies, under the legal principle that nobody had specifically prohibited individual ownership. He waited for a response. Nobody wrote back, and Dennis Hope took that silence as legal consent. Within months, he had established the Lunar Embassy, the world's first extraterrestrial real estate company, and he began selling plots of land on the moon for $25 per acre. Today, more than 4 decades later, Dennis Hope has sold over 611 million acres of lunar real estate to more than 6 million customers in over 180 countries. His customers include 3 former United States presidents, 2 former vice presidents, Hollywood celebrities, and business executives from some of the world's largest corporations. He has generated millions of dollars selling something that most legal scholars say he does not technically own. And here is the part that makes this a follow-the-money story rather than just a funny anecdote. The space economy is now worth hundreds of billions of dollars. It is projected to reach trillions within the next 2 decades. Mining companies are planning missions to extract real minerals from the moon and asteroids. National governments are establishing legal frameworks for space resource ownership. And suddenly the question of who owns what in space is no longer philosophical. It is the most valuable legal question on Earth. And a man who sent a letter in 1980 and got no reply might be sitting on the most audacious property claim in human history. My name is Max, and today we follow the money all the way to the moon. To understand why Dennis Hope's claim has any legal standing at all, we need to understand the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. The treaty was signed during the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union were in a space race. Both countries were deeply worried that the other might claim the moon as sovereign territory and use it for military purposes. So the major space powers came together and agreed, nobody gets to own space. Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty states that outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, is not subject to national appropriation by claim of sovereignty, by means of use or occupation, or by any other means. National appropriation. Those 2 words are the loophole. The treaty prohibits nations from claiming ownership. It says nothing about private individuals or private companies. This was not an oversight born of stupidity. In 1967, the idea that a private individual might want to claim the moon simply did not register as a realistic concern. The technology to do anything meaningful with space resources did not exist. The commercial space industry did not exist. The treaty was written to prevent a Cold War arms race in space, not to prevent a used car salesman from Sacramento from selling lunar plots by mail order, which is essentially what Dennis Hope was. When he sent his letter in 1980, he included a deed of ownership he had written himself, referencing the Lunar Embassy as the registering authority. He filed it with the County of San Francisco. His legal argument rested on a simple principle from property law: residential nullius, Latin for a thing belonging to nobody. Under traditional property law, residential nullius can be claimed by the first person who occupies or registers it, provided no other party has a legitimate prior claim. Hope argued that since the Outer Space Treaty only prohibited nations from claiming the moon, and since no nation had claimed it before him, the moon was residential nullius available for individual claim. Legal scholars have debated this argument for 40 years. The consensus is roughly this: Hope's claim is not clearly valid, but it is also not clearly invalid. And in the legal world, ambiguity is not nothing. Ambiguity, when billions or trillions of dollars are at stake, becomes the most expensive word in any language. Now let us talk about who actually buys lunar property, because this is where the story gets genuinely fascinating. The obvious assumption is that the 6 million people who have purchased lunar property are mainly buying it as a novelty gift, a funny certificate to hang on their wall, proof that they own 40 acres of Mare Tranquillitatis for the price of a fast food meal. And for the vast majority of buyers, that assumption is probably correct. But the list of confirmed buyers includes some names that challenge the novelty gift theory. Former U.S. President Ronald Reagan reportedly received lunar property as a gift. Former U.S. President Jimmy Carter was a confirmed buyer. Former U.S. President George W. Bush purchased lunar land. Former Vice President Al Gore purchased lunar land. Now here is the question that Max needs you to sit with. Why would former heads of state, with access to the world's best legal and financial advisors, purchase property that their own governments consider legally meaningless? 3 possible explanations. First, they genuinely bought it as a novelty, joke gift, and the fact that they are former presidents is irrelevant to the legal status of the claim. Second, someone in their circle saw potential value in having documented purchase records for lunar real estate, however tenuous, and advised them to acquire some. Third, They knew something the general public does not about where space law is heading. We cannot know which explanation is correct. But the timing matters. Because around the same time that presidential purchasing was happening, something else was developing quietly. The commercial space industry. SpaceX, Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic, Rocket Lab Planetary Resources, Deep Space Industries, a new generation of companies with genuine technical capability to reach space, land on other worlds, and begin extracting resources. And when real companies began planning real missions to extract real minerals from real celestial bodies, the question that the Outer Space Treaty had papered over for 60 years came roaring back to life. Who actually, Ines, what is up there? The moon is not empty rock. The lunar surface contains significant deposits of helium-3, a rare isotope that could potentially fuel nuclear fusion reactors. Some estimates suggest the helium-3 deposits on the moon could be worth somewhere between $3 and $5 trillion if fusion technology matures. The moon also contains water ice in its permanently shadowed polar craters. Water in space is extraordinarily valuable not because people need to drink it, but because water can be split into hydrogen and oxygen, the two components of rocket fuel. A source of water on the moon could effectively serve as a fuel depot for missions deeper into the solar system. Then there are the rare earth elements and metals that geological surveys suggest exist in significant quantities across the lunar surface. And then there are the asteroids. Asteroid 16 Psyche, a metallic asteroid in the main belt between Mars and Jupiter, is estimated to contain enough nickel and iron to be worth approximately $10 quintillion. That number has 18 zeros. For context, the entire global GDP of Earth is approximately $100 trillion. A number with 14 zeros. Asteroid Psyche alone, if its resources were ever extracted and brought to market, would contain wealth approximately 100 million times the value of the entire global economy. At that scale, the concept of money itself breaks down, which we explored in yesterday's video when we discussed what happens when everyone becomes a millionaire. But the point for today's investigation is simpler. Space contains real resources of genuinely extraordinary value. And the legal question of who gets to extract and own those resources is completely unresolved. In 2015, the United States passed the Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act, which stated that American citizens who extract resources from celestial bodies are entitled to own, transport, use, and sell those resources. This was a significant legal development. But it did not resolve the fundamental question of property rights in space. It said Americans could own what they extract. It did not say they had the right to extract from any particular location. Luxembourg passed similar legislation in 2017. The United Arab Emirates has been developing its own space resource framework. China has been accelerating its lunar program with explicit interest in resource extraction. The race to establish legal frameworks for space resources is the most important and least reported economic story of our time. And sitting quietly in Sacramento, with filing cabinets full of property deeds registered in the county of San Francisco, Dennis Hope has been watching all of this in Maine, obtaining his claim. Here is the trillion-dollar question that nobody has definitively answered. When a mining company lands on the moon and extracts helium-3 or water ice or rare earth elements from a location that Dennis Hope claims to have registered as his property 3 decades ago, what happens? Most space lawyers say Hope's claim would not hold up in court. But which court? There is no international court with jurisdiction over space property disputes. The Outer Space Treaty has no enforcement mechanism for individual claims. There is no space police force, no space property registry, no space court system. The legal architecture for resolving these disputes does not yet exist. And here is what follow the money has taught us across every investigation. When legal architecture does not exist and enormous amounts of money are at stake, the people who get paid are the lawyers who argue about it for decades while the people with real power quietly establish facts on the ground. This is the same dynamic we saw in the 1MDB scandal. The legal structures were technically ambiguous. Sophisticated actors exploited that ambiguity. By the time the legal system caught up, billions were gone. The space resources story is different in scale, but identical in mechanism. Ambiguous legal frameworks, plus enormous financial stakes, plus powerful actors racing to establish claims, plus inadequate oversight infrastructure, equals a situation where the people who move first and argue loudest will likely determine who benefits. And the people who will not benefit are the 6 billion ordinary human beings who were told in 1967 that space belongs to all of humanity. Because here is the final thing Max needs you to understand. The Outer Space Treaty said space is the province of all mankind. But province does not mean ownership. It means territory, jurisdiction, area of concern. No mechanism was ever created to ensure that the benefits of space resources flow to all of humanity, rather than to the governments and corporations with the technology and capital to reach them first. The moon belongs to all of us. That was the promise. And right now, the financial architecture being built around space resources suggests that it will end up belonging to whoever gets there first, claims it loudest, and has the best lawyers. Which is not all of us. Dennis Hope understood this in 1980. He sent a letter. Nobody replied. And he built a business worth millions on the gap between what the treaty said and what it meant. Now the gap is worth trillions. And the letter Dennis Hope sent in 1980 looks less like a joke with every passing year. My name is Max. You have been watching Follow the Money. If this investigation changed how you think about who owns the future, share it, because this story is just beginning. And by the time most people pay attention, the decisions will already have been made. Subscribe, because next video we investigate the financial system that most people interact with every single day, and almost nobody understands. How credit scores were invented, who profits from them, and why the system was specifically designed to keep certain people out. Subscribe. This one is personal. Follow the money.